How do you approach the nightmare that is firing people?
It's fucking tricky. Probably one of the worst parts of the job. I actually cried.
We were living together when you were fundraising and also when runway was getting lower and lower, and most founders, I don't know any founder really that hasn't had to go through the extremely tough time, probably like the nightmare that is firing people. How do you approach firing?
Yeah, it's fucking tricky. It is probably one of the worst parts of the job, I'd say. I actually remember the first time I had to do it, and it's maybe a little bit embarrassing, but I actually cried. And just an amazing guy, like amazing operator, had brought so much to the business. And we were going through the process of trying to fundraise. We got knocked back, and we were so close at so many different times. And it got to the point where we had to start making some decisions to try and extend our runway to make sure that we could raise and get to the next stage. I had a conversation with him, and at the start, he was just so open himself, and he actually ended up, the conversation went like, he was like, "Mate, it's going to be okay."
He's consoling you.
It's like, what just happened, dude? Like, I just let you go. Like,
Wow.
But I think showing that you actually care, like, as in showing him that like it hurt me to essentially have to let him go, and really respected how much he had done for us and how much he'd helped us and got us to where we are today, and giving them the context that if we don't make this decision now, as bad as it sounds, unfortunately, if it's not you, it'll be everybody. And they, at the end of the day, do understand. I think in most situations, a lot of other situations where I've had to let people go who have just had a baby, who have got some really deep stuff going on in their own personal lives, and they just suck. Like, the conversations just suck. Even being in the startup position that we're in, it's not like you can even give them a good package. It's like we're on our not last legs, but like we're getting towards like running on a runway. We're not even going to be able to give you like a great package. But like, just, we need like to say thank you for everything that you've done to us, for us, and ensure that they actually feel valued. And then off the back of that, there are things that you can do. So one of the most important things that you do is post on your founders network, or post on your LinkedIn, or give them the recommendation, go through how they can try and find another job, talk to contacts, allowed them to maintain access to our mental health platform. So for our employees, we use Oliva Health, which is an ability for everyone to book in therapy sessions. And if we have let you go, you get access to it for like the next year. Like, you can still like continue using Oliva Health. Wow. You can go through that therapy of trying to help you deal with this blow and moving on to the next thing. We also allow them to hold on to their laptop for the next 3 months, because that is the most important time they need it for job searching. And some people can't actually sort of have access to a machine or anything like that. So all of those things that come off the back are really important to show that, again, you care, and that they can essentially deal with this next phase of their life in the way that they need to, and maintain those relationships going forward. It's hilarious. We always joke, Aaron and I are always in the office, and we still have 3 or 4 people who used to work for us come into the office. Like, they're the only people that actually come in, not current Ember employees. It's bizarre. One of our first hire, actually, Drew, who holds a special place in all of our hearts, comes in pretty much most weeks into the office, even though he works for the Modern House now.
That sounds like amazing after firing care. And that is such a beautiful standard that you've set that I think so many people can take inspiration from. How do you manage the like pre-firing period? You've had the conversation with Aaron, you're like, runway's running out and we need to extend the runway. We have to let go of some people. These are the people that make the most sense that we need to for the sake of the business.
Yeah.
Once you've made that decision, before you've had the conversation with them, is there anything that you do in that period?
Yeah, it's a really interesting one actually, and I think the process here is actually quite different depending on how many people you're letting go. So there are actually some like rules and regulations that you have to make sure that you abide by. So, for instance, if you're letting go more than 20 people at one period of time, you have to go into what's known as a consultation period. So there are some practical things around that you actually have to make sure that you do. That is actually by, say, putting a role into redundancy rather than the person. This is for much bigger companies. So for us, we were at the stage where we obviously had 45. So there were only probably a couple of people, say, with the same role title. So the thing with redundancies is if you put a role into redundancy, you can't then hire for that role again for the next, say, 3-6 months because you've made that role redundant. So for instance, the head of partnerships, there's only one head of partnerships. So we made that role redundant. Obviously, it's the person who is the head of partnerships who's going to go for that. But say there were 3 head of partnerships, you'd have to put the role into redundancy and you'd have to do a consultation period with all 3 to work out who has the best skill set to essentially move forward with the role and who will then miss out and who will get made redundant. So that process, and then you can offer voluntary redundancies as well for people who want to actually take the package and move on. And so a lot of those things can feed into that sort of pre-redundancy period and decision making. And I think, again, it's all about being fair and understanding for the business structure at this point in time, what are the best roles that will push us forward. And that was where we actually then made the conscious decision to make sure that we were much more weighted towards senior roles within the business. So we put a lot of the junior roles at redundancy. And as harsh as that sounds, it was because we just didn't have the ability to give them what they needed from a training perspective and get them to that point where they could start moving up into sort of middle and then more senior resource. And I think we made the mistake actually over the last few years of going too heavily junior and not hiring enough sort of senior earlier on. I would actually go more senior much earlier on than hiring too junior and falling into the trap of not having the ability to give them what they need when it comes to a training perspective.
When's earlier on?
Yeah. So I reckon even the stage that we're at now as a 28-person business, we still have been hiring quite senior. And interestingly enough, another Stripe reference here, but Stripe were 30 people for about 5 years. They're obviously now multiple thousands and they scaled super quickly. But for 5 years, John and Patrick didn't fumble, but were trying to find what it was that was going to be that inflection point. And I think we're actually at our 5-year mark now, and we're 28 people, so a lot of similarities. But yeah, I mean that kind of goes back to what I was saying before of I do firmly believe that running a startup is running it and surviving until you find that moment where there is that inflection point. So being battered for the last sort of 5 years, going at all different routes into market, going at different sort of pivots and ways in which we can actually get into customers' hands and solve the ultimate vision. You always need to have what it is you're trying to achieve, and that can't change, obviously. But the way that you get there changes so much along the way. And I've definitely found that. And surviving those knocks are essentially what will allow you to get to the point to then hit that inflection point and land on the thing that will take you to the next level. And we do really feel like that is our next journey into this sort of uncharted territory for that around this embedded piece.